Welcome, believers. Welcome, you wonderfully weird people. Welcome to UFO Aliens and Weird Stuff. Now, 20 UFOs near the moon, right? The hollow moon, ancient lights, and the mystery beneath the surface. Now, look at the moon. I mean, really look at it. That pale, familiar object hanging above us has been there for every generation of human beings who have ever lived. Ancient civilizations built calendars around it. Sailors used it. Priests worshipped it, poets wrote about it, and eventually we travelled there. We planted flags. If you got a flag, we drove vehicles across its surface and we brought pieces of it home. And for a while, we thought we genuinely understood what it was: a dead world, a natural satellite, a piece of ancient planetary history orbiting Earth. But what if the moon still had secrets? What if strange things have been happening around it for centuries, and they have? What if some of the lights seen on its surface aren't simply reflections or geological events? What if objects really are moving around it? And what if something enormous is buried beneath its surface? A question everyone has to ask, eh? Because this week a story emerged from the Ukrainians that has once again placed the moon at the centre of the UFO mystery. Now, researchers from Ukraine's main astronomical observatory say high-speed observations of the sky around the moon revealed more than 20 unidentified objects, right? So not one, not two, not three or four, more than 20. Some appeared apparently stationary, others appeared to move across the lunar background, some were described as disc-shaped, others appeared to be ring-shaped. The researchers estimated some of the objects could be tens of kilometres across. And in their latest work, they describe objects travelling at speeds of up to and around 11 kilometres per second. Now, they even suggest that the moon could be acting as a base for these objects. Now, a base on the moon. But look, before we get carried away, there is something very important we need to say, because I'm a massive UFO fan, obviously, but we need to keep our feet on the ground. These observations are not proof of extraterrestrial spacecraft. Not yet. Okay, the work is still preliminary and has been independently confirmed, or has not been independently confirmed. The extraordinary size and distance estimates are also dependent on assumptions, all right, about what the objects are and how far away they are, because we all get that, right? I mean, if you look at a cow in a field, it's massive. If you look at it with a pair of binoculars, it looks small, doesn't it? So perhaps there is a perfectly ordinary explanation. Perhaps the observations are affected by imaging artifacts, nearby objects, reflections, atmospheric effects, or errors in estimating distance, right? That possibility has to remain on the table. But that's not what UFO aliens are about, isn't it? But tonight we are going to go down the rabbit hole, because the Ukrainian observations are only the beginning, right? The deeper we go, the stranger the moon becomes. Now, the observations themselves are fascinating. The researchers describe two broad categories. The first they call atmospheric UFOs. These appear to remain apparently fixed relative to the moon. Some reportedly displayed rapid variation in brightness. Now, the second category is even stranger. The researchers call them continental UFOs. They are described as objects appearing to move across the lunar surface. In one version of the research, disc-shaped objects are estimated at roughly 25 to 40 kilometres across. Right, the ring-shaped objects are described as being around 36 kilometres in size. One reported ring-shaped object was estimated to rotate in a matter of minutes, and the claimed speed, right, up to approximately 11 kilometres per second. These numbers are extraordinary. But here's the catch: when you look at tiny objects against the moon, you have to know exactly where that object is. You have to. If it's near the moon, the size is one thing. If it's much closer to Earth, its size could dramatically differ. And this is one of the major questions surrounding the Ukrainian observation. Are these enormous objects actually where they appear to be? Now, that is something independent observations will need to establish, because if they really are tens of kilometres across, we aren't talking about little flying saucers anymore. We're talking about objects larger than cities. And if they really are moving around the moon, the implications would be enormous. So, you know me, I do genuinely believe in UFOs, and I genuinely believe in motherships as well. So, is there a base on the moon? It's a question worth asking, right? The Ukrainian researchers themselves make a remarkable leap. They suggest that the moon may serve as a base for these objects. Now, imagine that. I am imagining it, right? A hidden installation on our nearest celestial neighbour, a place where objects could supposedly arrive, remain concealed, and then depart again. And let's face it, right? If you are a UFO, if you are an alien visitor, the moon would be perfect. I mean, I personally believe in underground water bases because that's perfect, right? They're well hidden. We can't see them. That's perfect. Underwater bases, right? But also the moon, a great place, right? The researchers even connect their observation to unidentified phenomena seen closer to Earth. In their interpretation, objects could potentially travel from the moon to Earth in a matter of minutes. Again, this is their hypothesis. It isn't established fact, but it sounds fantastic, doesn't it? But let's suspend disbelief for a moment, because if the moon really were being used as a base, then suddenly a lot of old UFO stories become much more interesting. And that's where our story takes its first turn, because strange things have been reported on the moon for centuries, long before rockets, long before satellites, long before cameras. So there is lights on the moon. Right? Astronomers have a name for strange temporary changes seen on the moon. It's called Transient Lunar Phenomena. They can appear as flashes, glowing areas, colour changes, hazy patches, brightening, darkening, and sometimes they seem to appear and then disappear. Some have perfectly reasonable explanations, of course they do. A meteorite striking the lunar surface can create a brilliant flash. Other possibilities include sunlight interacting with unusual terrain, dust, or possibly releases of gas. Great scientific excuses. They're great, right? But the report stretches back centuries. In 1178, monks in Canterbury described a strange fiery event apparently taking place on the moon. In 1787, William Herschel reported unusual glowing regions, and over the centuries, astronomers continued to report transient lunar activity. The moon apparently wasn't always as quiet as it looks, and one lunar region appears again and again in these stories, right? It's Aristarchus. That's what it's called, Aristarchus. The region around Aristarchus' creator has produced a remarkable number of reports of transient activity, brightening, colour changes, strange hazes, unusual glow. Now, the scientists, Aristarchus is a fascinating geological region, right? To UFO researchers, it looks like a hotspot. And that raises a question, especially for UFO researchers. What if some of the historical observers really were seeing something moving around the moon? Not an alien spacecraft necessary, not yet, but something that appeared and then vanished, something that changed brightness, something that our ancestors had no way of identifying, right? And I am going to say that they are UFOs, right? Alien spaceships. Now, have you heard about the moon that rang, right? So, humanity finally reaches the moon, right? Okay. And the Apollo missions give us something that no telescope could. They gave us instruments on the surface, size monitors, right? NASA deliberately crashed discarded spacecraft hardware onto the lunar surface to study how the moon responded, and the moon vibrated. Now, the signal lasted far longer than many people expected. The phrase that became famous was the moon that rang like a bell. And to hollow moon theorists, this was extraordinary. A bell ring, a hollow object resonates, right? And the moon appeared to resonate. So let's say that again, right? A bell rings, a hollow object resonates. and the moon appeared to resonate. The uploaded material, well, some uploaded material that I found describes the Apollo 12 impact producing reverberations lasting close to an hour, with another Apollo impact producing an even longer signal. And suddenly, right, the idea of a hollow moon entered UFO mythology. But science has a different explanation, and of course it would have. You cannot ignore it. The moon is extremely dry. Its crust is fractured. Its internal structure is different from Earth's. There is no atmosphere. There is no oceans to damp vibrations in the same way. So seismic energy can persist. Now we know the ringing is real, but that doesn't mean the moon is hollow. But it doesn't mean it doesn't, right? Modern lunar scientists point towards a layered interior, a crust, a mantle, and a core. So the Apollo data doesn't prove a hollow moon, but it did reveal something else. The moon is not a simple lump of rock. Its interior is complicated, and that matters. So do you buy the hollow moon theory? Because beneath that surface there are things we cannot see. Could be loads of things, couldn't there? So there is metal beneath the moon. And I know I'm lumping this all together, but it is important, right? So there is metal beneath the moon. So now we go underground, okay? Right, so apparently, because scientists have discovered something genuinely extraordinary beneath the moon's surface, and this time we aren't talking about UFO folklore, we're talking about a real scientific measurement. Deep beneath the South Pole, the Aitken Basin, on the far side of the moon, is an enormous concentration of dense material. The basin itself is one of the largest and oldest impact structures in the solar system. It stretches roughly 2,000 kilometers across, and beneath it, something heavy is hiding. Now, researchers using data from NASA's Grail mission combined with lunar topography measurements detected a huge mass anomaly. The estimated minimum mass exceeds 2.18 times 10 over 18 kilograms, more than 2 quadrillion kilograms. Sorry, imagine burying an enormous mountain of metal beneath the moon. That is the scale we're talking about. That and this and the anomaly is deep, hundreds of kilometers beneath the surface. The researchers proposed a natural explanation. Okay, a gigantic asteroid hit the moon billions of years ago. If that asteroid had an iron-rich core, some of that material could have been driven deep into the lunar mantle. It's a good theory. Another possibility is that the anomaly consists of dense oxides left over from the moon's ancient magma ocean. Both are perfectly legitimate scientific hypotheses, aren't they? By now, right, let's go down the rabbit hole, because that's what we do. What if the metal isn't what we think? Suppose, because this is UFO aliens and weird stuff, just suppose the moon wasn't entirely natural. Suppose an advanced civilization had reached the moon billions of years ago. What would they need? Of course, they would need metal, enormous amounts of it, to build structures, power systems, machinery, perhaps shielding, perhaps underground facilities, perhaps technology designed to survive for geological periods of time. Now imagine that something catastrophic happened, a collision, an impact, a war, an accident, or simply the passage of billions of years, and deep beneath the surface something remained. What do you think? Something so massive that modern spacecraft could detect its gravitational signature. There is no evidence that is what's on the South Pole Aitken anomaly represents. There is no evidence of that. The scientific explanation remains neutral, but the anomaly gives the UFO theorists something very important, a genuine mystery. And that's what we like, innit? A genuine mystery, not a blurry photograph, not a witness saying, I saw something strange late at night. A measured difference in the moon's gravitational field. Something really is down there. The question we need to know is, what is it? What do you think? And now we arrive at one of the oldest modern lunar conspiracies. Again, the hollow moon theory. Now, in 1970, Soviet researchers Mikhail Basin and Alexander Shkopikov published an extraordinary argument. Could the moon have been created or placed into orbit by extraterrestrial intelligence? Their proposal was radical. They suggested that the moon might be an artificial object, possibly with a metallic shell, an enormous engineered structure. The idea was influenced by what they regarded as unusual lunar characteristics, its density, right, its orbit, its relationship with Earth, its apparent unusual interior, and its extraordinary size compared with the planet it orbits. Right, the theory was later popularized by writers and UFO researchers, and once it entered public culture, it became almost impossible to kill because it offered an explanation for every lunar mystery. The hollow moon theory, I mean, it's way out there, isn't it? But could it be true? The strange seismic behavior, if the moon is hollow because it's got unusual craters, then the moon has a shell, right? The lights, their activity, the alleged structures, when we know those, I'll cover those in a minute, are their bases. The far side of the moon, okay, it's hidden from Earth, what would be perfect for an alien base, right? And now the buried mass, the metal we were just talking about, perhaps is part of the machinery. Look, it's only one theory, okay? Exactly why we should be suspicious of it. Because when one theory explains absolutely everything, it can become impossible to falsify, right? There are also claims about the moon's remarkable relationship with the sun and Earth. Its apparent size in our sky is remarkably close to the sun's apparent size. That allows total solar eclipses. To ancient people, a total eclipse must have seemed impossible. The moon perfectly crossing the face of the sun, the sky going dark, the sun appearing to vanish. It is spectacular. Some source material takes this coincidence much farther, arguing that the moon's dimensions and distance suggest deliberate placement. Right? So we'll say that again. Some source materials takes the coincidence much further, arguing that the moon's dimensions and distance suggest that the moon has been deliberately placed in our orbit, perfectly placed where it is. But the popular claim that the measurements are exactly 400 to 1 isn't necessarily correct, apparently. And the moon's orbit isn't perfectly circular, it's elliptical. Its distance from Earth changes, its apparent size changes. So the coincidence is fascinating, but it isn't evidence that the moon was engineered. Still, it makes a good question, doesn't it, right? Why does our sky produce such spectacular eclipses? Chance? Physics? Or something else? And now the story gets really strange, right? Because some ancient traditions appear to describe a time when the moon wasn't in Earth's sky. Now, according to accounts attributed to Aristotle, the ancient Pelagian was said to have lived in Arcadia during an era described as when the moon did not exist. And I suggest you look at that, it's fascinating, right? Other classical writers made similar claims about the Arcadians being older than the moon. Okay, so the uploaded material also points to a tradition from other cultures describing an earlier period before the moon appeared in the heavens, right? So the material I uploaded does point to traditions and cultures describing an early period before the moon appeared in the heavens, right? And this is where the story becomes irresistible to ancient astronaut theorists, because I am one of them. I am an ancient astronaut theorist. Because if these traditions preserve some genuine memory, what exactly were they remembering? A world without the moon? A different moon? Or several smaller moons? Or simply mythology? Because we have to be careful. Ancient myths are not scientific records, are they? And there is no archaeological evidence demonstrating that human beings lived on Earth before the moon existed. But the legends are real. They're out there, they're documented. The question is, what inspired them. What inspired our ancestors to write stuff, right? So the story becomes even stranger when you travel to Africa. So I've got some uploaded source and it describes Zulu traditions involving two figures, right? And I'll try and pronounce them, but I'll put them up there, right? Wowana and Mpunga, who supposedly brought the moon to Earth. The interpretation given by UFO researchers is extraordinary. An extraterrestrial civilization arrives. The moon is somehow transported and put into position. Humanity is changed. The earth is transformed, of course, because we know what the moon does. And suddenly, the moon isn't merely a satellite. It becomes a machine, doesn't it? A tool to perhaps even a gigantic piece of technology. Now, there is no scientific evidence that that is what's happened, of course not. But now we do have a recurring theme. Ancient stories describing a time before the moon. Modern theories describing a moon that was deliberately placed. And a scientific world still refining its understanding of exactly how our moon is formed. Three completely different sources, all pointing us towards the same question. Where did the moon come from? Now, science has a leading answer. Of course it does, right? The giant impact hypothesis. Now, they reckon billions of years ago, a Mars-sized body, usually called Theia, collided with the young Earth. The impact was catastrophic. Massive quantities of material were blasted into orbit. That material eventually formed the moon. And the theory explains many important features. But planetary science continues to refine the details, and that uncertainty is often exploited by hollow moon theorists. Now, they say if science doesn't have every detail solved, how can it be certain? But this is where we need to make an important distinction. Even I need to make this, right? Science doesn't claim to know everything. In fact, I don't trust it myself, right? It builds models from evidence. These models can change, right? And we've seen this in the past, haven't we? New data can overturn old assumptions, and it happens all the time. But an incomplete scientific explanation isn't evidence that an alien explanation is correct, right? The hollow moon theory still needs positive evidence. And so far, of course, right, so far that evidence hasn't been produced. So let's talk about the alleged structures. Now, we can return to photographs, right? I'll put some up there because UFO researchers have spent decades examining lunar images looking for artificial objects, right? Okay, some have identified what they call the shard, the tower, and the castle. Geometric shapes, long shadows, apparent towers, objects that seem to stand above the surrounding terrain. Now, the uploaded material describes several of these alleged structures and the interpretations given to them by UFO researchers. To believers, of course, they are evidence. To skeptics, they are rocks. Simple as that. Shadows, image artifacts, or, I can't pronounce this, or pareidolia. Pareidolia. I think we all know what I'm trying to say, right? If I'm not pronouncing that right, pareidolia is that humans tend to see things, don't they? We see faces in clouds and that sort of stuff. And there is a simple test, right? Simple as that. Send another spacecraft. Take higher resolution photographs. Imagine the same region but from different angles. Observe it under different lighting and see if the structures remain. If they do, then we have a mystery, don't we? Right? If it doesn't, then it's just simply an illusion, isn't it? Right? That is exactly how science should work. It's as simple as that. But look, if they did take new photographs, would they tell us? I don't think they would, right? If they went back up there and they found alien structures, they wouldn't tell us. Right. So the Apollo UFO stories. So we get into the astronauts now, because according to UFO folklore, Apollo astronauts saw things they weren't supposed to see. Now, one famous story claims Neil Armstrong told Mission Control they're here and they're parked on the side of the crater. Another story claims Buzz Aldrin saw a strange light moving relative to the stars. And another concerns a mysterious period of radio silence. We all know that, right? These stories have become legendary. But there is an important problem. The famous Armstrong quotation isn't supported by any authenticated Apollo transcripts because they got rid of it. It appears to have emerged through UFO literature and latent retellings, and that may be true. But I don't trust NASA. I really don't. You know, they wouldn't tell you anything. The same caution applies to many alleged recordings of astronauts discussing alien crafts. But there is one genuine Apollo incident that is much more interesting because it actually happened and there's proof, right? The music behind the moon. Now, this was Apollo 10 in 1969, and I am not saying for one moment that none of what I just mentioned didn't happen. I generally do believe it did, right? And NASA has covered it up. That's where I stand on this, all right? So, the music behind the moon, Apollo 10, 1969, the crew was orbiting the moon. As the spacecraft passed behind the moon, the astronauts reported hearing strange sounds, a whistling, a strange musical tone, something they couldn't immediately identify. And for decades, UFO researchers have wondered whether they were hearing an extraterrestrial signal. NASA's explanation was much more conventional. Of course it was. Radio interference between the spacecraft systems. And that explanation is entirely plausible. The strange sound does not prove aliens, but the incident is fascinating because it demonstrates something important. Spacecrafts can produce phenomena that sounds utterly bizarre to people who don't understand the technology involved. Yeah, all right then. Which means that every UFO investigation has the same problem. The unknown can be created by nature. We know that, don't we? By technology, by perception, or potentially by something genuinely unknown. And then there is the far side. The side of the moon that humanity couldn't see directly for most of history. It isn't actually the dark side. It does receive sunlight, right? It's simply the side that normally faces away from Earth because the moon is tidally locked. We continually see roughly the same hemisphere, and that fact has made the far side the perfect location for conspiracy theorists. Yes, it has, and I am one of them, right? Secret bases, alien structures, hidden spacecrafts, ancient structures, military experiments, and even secret human colonies. I mean, there is no confirmed evidence for any of that, but there is something genuinely fascinating about the far side. It is dramatically different from the side we see from Earth, and some of its most important geological features are enormous, including the South Pole, the Aitken Basin, and deep beneath it, as we said, that mysterious concentration of dense material. So, what if the asteroid was something else? Now we can finally connect the pieces, right? Scientists say the South Pole, the Aitken mass, may be the remains of the metallic core of the asteroid that recreated the basin. That does make sense, doesn't it, right? It's a natural explanation. But imagine, right, just imagine, just for the sake of the rabbit hole and for UFO aliens and weird stuff, that the object wasn't an asteroid. Imagine it was a spacecraft, an enormous one, something metallic, something ancient, something that arrived billions of years ago, something that possibly collided with the moon. You never know, dear. Or perhaps something that was deliberately buried. We have absolutely no evidence that this has happened. But this is where science fiction and UFO mythology collide. And one fictional object has become permanently associated with the idea, the monolith. The perfect black structure from 2001 A Space Odyssey. A machine left behind by an unknown civilization. A device that has survived for millions of years. And here's the strange thing. When people look at the moon and imagine alien structures, the monolith is almost always somewhere in the back of their minds. But the real moon doesn't contain a confirmed monolith. Not yet, anyway. Nobody's found it. So suppose, right, an advanced civilization that existed billions of years ago. Suppose it could travel between planets. Suppose it could manipulate matter on a planetary scale. Why build the moon? Why do it? Perhaps it wasn't built at all. Perhaps it was modified. Perhaps an existing natural body was transformed. Perhaps the interior was used as a shelter. Perhaps something was placed inside it. And then the civilization disappeared. The moon remained. Billions of years passed. Civilizations rose and fell on Earth. The pyramids were built. Rome rose and then Rome fell. Humanity discovered electricity, right? Flights, nuclear power, computers, space flight, and eventually we looked back at the moon. And just perhaps, because bear with me, right? Perhaps we began finding traces of something that had been there all along. Because NASA's never going to tell you. Again, this is, of course, speculation, but it creates a fascinating thought. Maybe the moon isn't an alien spaceship. Maybe it's an alien archive, a time capsule, a place where something was deliberately preserved. And there's another question, right? Why did the Apollo mission stop? Right, Apollo 17, December 1972, the final Apollo mission to land humans on the moon. And then we stopped for decades. We just didn't bother going back. To UFO researchers, to me, this is one of the greatest mysteries because I am old enough to watch Space 1999. I genuinely thought we would have, by now, bases on the moon. Why would humanity accomplish something as extraordinary as walking on another world and then just largely walk away from it? The ordinary explanation is powerful. Apollo was enormously expensive. The political objective of beating the Soviet Union had largely been achieved. Public enthusiasm declined. Budgets changed, and NASA's priority moved elsewhere. But mate, I'm not buying that. Several additional Apollo missions were cancelled. There is no evidence that NASA stopped because astronauts discovered aliens. Of course there isn't, but I do think that's why they stopped. But conspiracy theorists ask a different question. What if they found something? What if they found something unexpected, something dangerous even? Something politically explosive, something that couldn't be explained. Now, there is no confirmed evidence of such a discovery, but the questions refuse to die, don't they, right? Why did they stop? Now, over the decades, claims of secret lunar bases have multiplied. Some say alien, some say American, some say Russian, some say joint human alien. I love that. Some even claim that secret Apollo missions continued after Apollo 17. They just didn't tell anyone. So the source I found contains numerous versions of these claims, including alleged lunar bases, secret programs, and supposed leaks. Now, there is one important fact buried beneath the mythology. Governments genuinely considered military uses for the moon during the Cold War. Apparently, plans for lunar bases were discussed. Military applications were studied, and the moon was regarded as strategically important. That is an historical fact, but that doesn't prove extraterrestrial bases existed, and that distinction matters, doesn't it? Because if we're going to investigate the moon, we have to separate what we know, of course, okay, because I hate being sensible, what we know from what we think. And I think we didn't go to the moon because of aliens, right? And finally, what we desperately want to believe. But perhaps the strangest possibility isn't that aliens are living on the moon now. Perhaps they were first, right? Ancient stories from different cultures have been interpreted as memories of a time before the moon. You can't deny that. Some material even raises the possibility of earlier moons or multiple moons before the present moon, right? Some material, right? And what I'm referring to there is some literature, right? Some literature even raises the possibility of an earlier, smaller moon or multiple moons before the present moon. Now, could something like that really have happened? Astronomically, Earth may have experienced different moon configurations very early in its history, but that is vastly different from saying human beings remember a world without the moon. So there is no scientific evidence that humans witnessed the moon's arrival, but still the legend survives, right? So there is no scientific evidence that humans witnessed the moon's arrival. And of course that's obvious, but there is literature to say it didn't exist. I don't know what you make of that. Do you think someone just simply made that up? What were they referring to? Because we said that earlier, right? Still, the legend survives, of course, and perhaps legends survive because they contain fragments of events that really happened, or perhaps humans simply love stories about lost worlds because we do, don't we? We don't know. Right, let's put everything on the table then. 20 plus unidentified objects reported around the moon. Strange shapes, rapid movement, brightness changes, ancient reports of lunar lights, the Aristarchus mystery. All right, that's where the metal is. Apollo seismic signals. All right, they dropped stuff the moon rang. The hollow moon theory, alleged lunar structures, Apollo UFO stories, right? The strange Apollo 10 radio signal and the mysterious far side of the moon, ancient traditions of a time before the moon, an enormous mass buried deep beneath the South Pole Aitken Basin. It's tempting to connect everything, isn't it? Maybe the moon is artificial. Maybe it was deliberately positioned. Maybe there is a base inside it. Maybe the objects around it are spacecrafts. Maybe the ancient stories are distorted memories. Maybe the buried mass is something far more interesting than asteroid material. But there is obviously another possibility. Maybe we are connecting dots that were never connected. Maybe every mystery has its own explanation, and the moon simply happens to be a place where strange things naturally happen. That possibility does deserve something because the moon really is strange. We don't need aliens to make it fascinating. But what if? Now let's imagine, right? Let's imagine the impossible. A future lunar mission lands on the far side. A rover approaches the South Pole Aitken Basin. Its instruments began scanning the ground. The gravity anomaly is detected. The rover begins drilling. 10 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters. Then the drill hits something, not rock, metal. The scientists assume it's impact debris, so they continue drilling. Right, then the material becomes more complex. Then the rover's radar detects a cavity, not a small cavity, a huge cavity. And inside it, something geometric, something manufactured, a door, a structure, a machine, something that could not have formed naturally. And suddenly, the moon isn't a mystery anymore. It's evidence. So what do you think? Evidence that someone was here, perhaps billions of years ago. And if that happens, then of course everything changes. The first question wouldn't be, are aliens real? The question would already be answered, wouldn't it? They are real. The question would be, where did they go? Fascinating stuff. And that's where the Ukrainian observations become even more interesting. Because if those objects are eventually confirmed, if independent observatories reproduce the observation, if the distances are established, if their movements are verified, if their physical characteristics are measured, then we will have to reconsider everything. Perhaps they are natural. Perhaps they're human technology. Perhaps they're just satellites. Perhaps there's something we haven't even thought of. But if they're artificial and not human, remember the 20 Ukrainians, then the moon may no longer be simply a place where we look for answers. It may be where we find the evidence that we are not alone. The Ukrainian researchers have already made the most extraordinary suggestion that the moon could serve as a base. But there is a long road between proactive observation and confirmed extraterrestrial civilization. But the road begins with one thing, replication, all right? Other telescopes, other countries, other scientists, the same objects, the same positions, the same movements, get everyone looking in the same direction, and eventually close-up images. Now, for more than 50 years, human beings largely stopped walking on the moon. But that's changing. Humanity apparently is going back. NASA's Artemis program has already taken humans back into the lunar orbit, and new missions are intended to expand our ability to explore the lunar environment. China is pursuing its own ambitious lunar program. Private companies are developing lunar spacecrafts, and eventually humans will establish a much more permanent presence around our nearest celestial neighbour. This time, we will have better cameras, we will have better computers, better sensors, better mapping, better communication, and much more reason to investigate every anomaly. So perhaps the greatest irony is, if there is something on the moon, we may not have to believe it for much longer. We may simply be able to go and have a look. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? UFO aliens. What do you think, believers? Right? So do you think that if we went back to the moon, I don't know, say Elon Musk, say the Americans, say the Russians, say the Chinese, I don't know, anyone, right? They go back to the moon, they find some really weird stuff, proof that aliens are there, proof that there are bases. They wouldn't tell us. They just simply wouldn't tell us. So we are never going to know the truth, right? So this was UFO aliens and weird stuff. I really appreciate it. Thanks for sticking around. This was all about the moon. It really started with the 20 UFOs spotted the Ukrainians. Do you think they spotted UFOs? Because I do. I personally do think they spotted UFOs. And I think UFOs have been knocking around for years. And they're always buzzing them. They're always around the moon, always. Right? So anyway, let me know what you think. Drop me a comment. Drop me a line. Call me an idiot if you want to, because, hey, mate, I'm putting myself out there. I do believe they are UFOs. All right? So I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.